We begin with the war in Gaza and Israel's reaction to President Biden's warning on the supply of US weapons to its ally. Mr. Biden has said America will continue to give Israel the weapons it needs to defend itself. But he added Israel won't keep Washington's support if it carries out military operations in heavily populated areas. Israel's UN envoy has called Mr. Biden's remarks disappointing. More on that in a moment. But first, here's more of what President Biden said.
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently.
Well, for more on that, our North America correspondent Will Vernon sent this update from Washington.
President Biden said America would continue to give Israel the weapons it needs to defend itself. But, he said, the US wouldn't supply heavy weapons, bombs, artillery shells that could be used in a major assault on the city of Rafah. And Mr. Biden said it is these US-supplied weapons that have already killed civilians in Gaza. And human rights groups say these munitions are responsible for the utter devastation in Gaza. Now, earlier we heard from US officials who confirmed that one shipment of heavy bombs was delayed last week and that other shipments were under review. And that was a hugely significant announcement, a historic step. Not for 40 years has the US held up any arms deliveries to Israel for this kind of reason. The Israeli government said that it was very disappointed. Now, the US, of course, is Israel's biggest supplier of military equipment, its most important ally. And Mr. Biden has already come under criticism from Republicans in Congress, for example, who say he is abandoning a key US ally. But I think Mr. Biden is hoping that by making this move, there have been many months of expressions of deep concern from President Biden, from other officials too, about the conduct of the war in Gaza, about the plans for Rafah. Those warnings have been more or less ignored by the Israelis, who said they're going to go into Rafah regardless. So I think Mr. Biden is hoping that this will send a clear message, sufficiently clear, to the Israelis that they must change course.
Will Vernon there. Well, let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell, who is in Jerusalem for us. Yolande, good to have you. Now, you and I regularly talk about this growing rift between the US and Israel. It's become much more public now, hasn't it? What's the latest we've heard?
Well, this is being covered extensively in the Israeli media, as you would expect. There haven't been many comments yet from Israeli officials, although we did have Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, speaking to public radio. He said that these comments by President Biden were extremely disappointing and they would give hope to Israel's enemies. We've also had the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, coming out and really criticizing what he says is Israel's government's management of the country and the relationship with the US. It's a source of great concern among many Israelis that the relationship is becoming so strained. Of course, Washington is the closest ally of Israel. It provides a diplomatic shield for it, as well as this huge amounts of military assistance. So it's not exactly clear about how this is going to affect things happening on the ground in Rafah. I mean, from what we know, there has been more heavy shelling, the Israeli military continuing to carry out what it says are targeted raids against Hamas. But people living in Rafah, not just the areas that have been given evacuation orders, tell us that it is terrifying, that panic has set in among people and they really just don't know where to go for their own safety.
And Yolande, what has Israel said, Benjamin Netanyahu said, about why Israel would move forward with such a large-scale offensive despite opposition from its own allies?
Well, the reason that Israel really wants to go into Rafah with a full-scale invasion is because it says that there are 4 Hamas battalions remaining there. It's really the last stronghold of Hamas in Gaza, in Israel's eyes. And it doesn't believe that it can achieve the victory that it has said is only achievable by dismantling Hamas in Gaza unless it goes into this southernmost city. Now, of course, the problem with that, which we're starting to see already, is that you have so many displaced people in the city that a full-scale invasion there, indeed any kind of increased military action, really does involve huge amounts of human suffering. We're getting reports of people in the past day of civilians having been killed in the airstrikes that have been going on. But even bigger than that is the fact you now have this sort of downward spiral in the humanitarian situation because aid is blocked from going in through the Rafah crossing, which Israel took control of early on Tuesday. That's not been open to humanitarian groups since. And also, although Israel said yesterday that it was opening the Kerem Shalom crossing after 4 days of closure, it said caused by Hamas rocket fire, which killed 4 Israeli soldiers nearby. I mean, there's so much fighting going on in that area, and Palestinian workers fled with the start of the Israeli military operation. That really means that no aid is able to get in there in effect either.
And Yolande, as this rift becomes public, there are also domestic pressures on each of these leaders in the US and Israel. What pressures is Benjamin Netanyahu facing domestically right now?
I mean, he has 2 pressures, really. I mean, you have on the one hand the hostage families who have so much public support in Israel. They're carrying out near daily demonstrations. They say Rafah can wait, bring the hostages home. They can't wait. And then you have those far-right members of the coalition government that Mr. Netanyahu heads, who have been saying specifically that Rafah must be prioritized, a full invasion there. That's the only route to bring Israel the victory that they want. And they have threatened, if Israel signs up to a reckless deal in their eyes, with the ceasefire talks still going on in Cairo, that they would walk away from his government.
Yolande, thank you for that update. Now, as Yolande was saying, the humanitarian situation on the ground is already dire, and it is getting worse. An investigation by BBC Verify has found over half of Gaza's water and sanitation facilities have been damaged or destroyed since the start of the war. Here's Caroline Hawley.
Water in Gaza is in dangerously short supply, posing serious health risks to the population. BBC Verify has analysed more than 600 water and sanitation facilities. Here, the dots represent a mixture of water wells, tanks, desalination and sewage treatment plants. The red dots are all those that have been destroyed or damaged. That's more than 300 facilities across the Gaza Strip. Now, Gaza used to have 6 functioning wastewater treatment plants, which are crucial to preventing the build-up of sewage and the spread of disease. This was one of them. Here it was before October the 7th, and now after. 3 others are also damaged or destroyed, and we've been told the remaining 2 are out of action, largely because of a lack of fuel. Now, to compound the problem, officials in Gaza say they're struggling to repair damaged infrastructure after an attack on a key warehouse where fuel and spare parts were stored. This shows the warehouse before and after it was struck at the end of January. The IDF said it was targeting Hamas fighters nearby. It's accused the group of storing weapons and ammunition inside civilian structures, including in and near water facilities. All of this has had a very direct human consequence. The World Health Organization says that the average person needs 15 litres of water each day for drinking, washing and cooking. But most people in Gaza are getting just a fraction of that. And that scarcity of water and untreated sewage are causing dehydration and disease.
So we are seeing death coming from the outbreaks of disease in the highly vulnerable, in the small children, in the elderly, and in the pregnant women. Hepatitis in pregnant women is very, very dangerous. This is killing people.
People in Gaza have told us that they're queuing for hours to access drinking water. Others are drinking dirty water. Aid agencies want to truck in more water but say they can't because of limited access to fuel. And this isn't just an acute problem now, exacerbated by the current Israeli operation in Rafah. Gaza's infrastructure will take years, decades to rebuild. You can see our full analysis on the BBC News website.
Caroline Hawley there.